And note that welcome everyone to the ACRL African American Studies Librarians Interest Group Midwinter meeting. The session will start now, and I'll hand it over to Glenda. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our program. I'm Glenda Alvin, the current convener for the African American Studies Librarians Interest Group. Today, we will have a presentation from our African American Funnel Committee on developing updated Library of Congress subject headings for our discipline. Before we get underway, I have a couple of announcements. My term is only for 1 year. We need an incoming convener who will lead the group beginning July 1. For those of you on tenure track, this is an excellent opportunity to lead an ACRL group. We also have a position in the ACRL Liaison Assembly for a liaison from ASLIC to the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, and we are looking for someone to fill it. I have applied for space for our group to have an annual meeting at ALA in June, where we will have a presentation on African American studies, archives, or librarianship. If you are interested in presenting, please let me know. We are now ready to start our presentation, and I'll turn it over to Erica.
Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful to see you here today. As Glenda mentioned, our presentation topic is the African American Subject Funnel Project. And I'll just introduce myself. I'm Erica Bruchko. I'm the African American Studies and U.S. History Librarian at Emory University in Atlanta. And I'm currently serving as the subject coordinator or the subject chair of the funnel. We're joined also by Glenda Alvin, who's the Dean of Libraries and Media Centers at Tennessee State University. And as she mentioned, she is the convener of ACLIG, and Michelle Cronquist, who's the Special Collections Cataloger at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And she currently serves as our cataloging chair of the funnel project. So we're just going to begin. So this is what we're going to cover today: some definitions and context, the funnel history and mission, which Glenda will cover, and then some more details about the proposal process, including new heading proposals, change proposals. And then we're going to do a kind of proposal brainstorm where we hope to get your feedback and prioritize some recent ideas that we've had on terms that we should focus on. And then finally, we'll give you some information on how to get involved. All right, definitions and context. For those of you who might not be familiar with funnels, I certainly wasn't before I began this work. A funnel is simply a group of librarians that works collectively across institutions to improve Library of Congress subject headings related, in our case, to the African American experience. There are other funnels. There's a music funnel. There's a Latin American and Indigenous Studies funnel. But as Michelle will mention, we work with the PCC, the Program for Cooperative Cataloging, to make recommendations to the Library of Congress. Some of the terms that we have proposed fall into two categories. We've proposed change proposals, such as the former racially mixed people to multiracial people, and that's actually a project in progress that hasn't been approved yet. And the slaves to enslaved persons change in the vocabulary, as well as the Blacks to Black people change. And these are just some representative examples. Some formerly omitted or misrepresented concepts that we've suggested be added to the vocabulary include the Great Migration, the Middle Passage, the transatlantic slave trade, environmental racism, and you can see some examples here. So a few notes on the structure of the group. We have monthly all-group meetings, periodic working meetings, and outreach meetings. But we also have a very active listserv. So depending on what your job situation is like, we'll talk about this later in the call for volunteers. But there are many ways to get involved, and we do work across different mediums. We have a Google group for document sharing, and again, our work is volunteer driven, and people do participate when they can. All right, so with that kind of overview of the group, I'm going to turn it over to Glenda. And Glenda, if I'm not advancing slides, please just let me know that I need to move forward.
Thank you. I'm going to discuss the history of the funnel. Next slide. A call to action came in 1984 when Dorothy Ann Washington, head of cataloging unit at the Schomburg, wrote an article entitled, "Are the Standards Adequate for Organizing African American Studies Resources?" And in her abstract, she stated standards of bibliographic organization often are inadequate for those libraries with extensive African American studies collections or those with active user groups. The essay identifies areas where the standards are least effective. The experiences of the author and others at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture provide useful insight into various problems associated with the organization of African American studies collections. Timely suggestions for improvements are offered. Next. During the African American Studies Librarian section, which we call AFAS, meeting at ALA in New Orleans in 1999, Dorothy Washington, now the head of the Purdue University Black Culture Center, and Anthony Franks, a cooperative cataloger at LC, gave a presentation on the benefits of sponsoring a funnel. A PCC SACO workshop was held at ALA in Chicago on July 7th, 2000. A subject cataloging workshop for non-catalogers followed on January 13, 2001 during the AFAS meeting at ALA Midwinter, which established a funnel. The group decided to compile a list of reference sources for cataloging African American materials. Next. Purpose of the African American funnel. There are three major purposes: to suggest and revise subject headings, to create new subject headings relevant to the African American experience, culture, and history, to provide an opportunity for subject experts, catalogers, and archivists who work with the discipline to become directly involved with improving access to content. Next, please. African American funnel from 2000 to 2011. According to Dorothy Washington's 2011 blog, the group successfully proposed the following headings: African Americans, reparations, African American, social reformers, and they also were successful in changing Afro-Americans to African Americans. Next, please. The original group moved on to other interests. Under Malika Grant's leadership of AFAS, Carmelita Pickett led the funnel and continued to work with it during Janique B. Love's leadership of AFAS. Carmelita recruited members and reconnected the funnel with Paul Frank, the Library of Congress liaison. The funnel considered the use of Negro in the Cutter system, which was N4. Due to the ACR rules regarding membership count, AFAS transitioned to the African American Studies Librarian Interest Group, ASLIC, in 2016. The funnel group remained as the only working committee, and Dr. Jimica Piper took over as the leader of the funnel. Next, please. The active contributors began to decline once more. So Dr. Piper, Carmelita, and I posted on the listservs for ASLIC, the HBCU Library Alliance, and AutoCAD, and gained additional members. The revitalized group was successful in getting the N4 Cutter for Negro discontinued. They have created an organizational structure and workflow for effectively moving proposals for changes to subject headings through the SACO process. Next, please. Since 2020, there has been a stable and active membership in the funnel under the leadership of Deborah Tamaris, who was the former chair, Stacy Ross, former cataloging co-chair, Michelle Cronquist, cataloging co-chair, and Erica Bruchko, subject chair, Kaylin Blanc, coordinator, and Katrina Davis, former coordinator. Michelle and Erica will discuss the funnel's work, including its success in changing LC subject headings for the African American experience to more relevant, accurate, and updated terminology. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenda. So I'm just going to give a pretty brief and high-level overview of the process that we go through to try to get subject headings added to LCSH or changed in LCSH. Next, please. So we do this work as part of the SACO program, which stands for Subject Authority Cooperative Program. And it's a program run through the Library of Congress, and it allows member libraries to submit proposals for new subject headings or changes to existing subject headings to the Library of Congress. So libraries can be institutional members, such as a lot of large academic libraries like mine are. But individual librarians can also participate as members of funnels. And the funnels, like Erica talked about, are usually organized around a particular subject area. And the strength of a funnel is that it can bring together people who have technical cataloging expertise, like I do, with people who have subject expertise, like Erica and Glenda. So we can bring all that expertise together and work together on doing these proposals. Next, please. So I'm just going to go through a couple of examples. I think the biggest gap in LCSH that we filled was for the Great Migration. It was really surprising to a lot of people that there was no subject heading for the Great Migration, but there wasn't until a few years ago. And so for a book like The Warmth of Other Suns, the subject headings that were used instead were African Americans, Migrations, History 20th Century, and Migration, Internal United States, History 20th Century. So, headings that reflected a more general topic, but you couldn't actually search on the term Great Migration, which is what everyone would call it, in order to find works about this subject. Next slide. So we did a proposal to add this to LCSH. So what do I mean by a proposal? So first of all, you need to cite some work that is being cataloged that requires this new subject heading. So in this case, we cited this work, Making Our Way Home by Blair and Lonnie, which is about the Great Migration. You can also cite other works on the topic, which we did. I think we also cited the Warmth of Other Suns. And then then you often will also cite reference works. We cited Britannica Online, and that had a definition of the Great Migration. So we put that all together, all these citations together with our proposed subject term and the broader terms that would cause it to fit into the Library of Congress vocabulary, and we sent it to the Library of Congress. So next slide. So you can see this is from the classification web system that catalogers use in order to look up subject headings. So it shows in bold the established subject term Great Migration, circa 1914 to circa 1970, since this is an event that doesn't have like a clear beginning and ending point. And then there's a scope note defining the term. There's a variant term, Great Black Migration, and then there are broader terms for African Americans, migrations, and migration internal United States. So that's what it ended up looking like in Library of Congress subject headings after we proposed it and got it added. Next slide, please. Okay, and then I'm going to also talk about one of our change proposals. So while we've done a lot to fill in gaps in LCSH, we have also probably our most important, most impactful work has been on updating existing subject headings in LCSH. So just for an example, we, as Eric mentioned earlier, worked on changing Blacks to Black people. So that began with members of the funnel talking about how they found the term Blacks to be offensive and didn't feel represented by it. And so that was just the starting point in us deciding to work on this. So if you do want to change an existing LCSH term, you need to go through a couple of steps. You need to make the case that the existing heading is either offensive or out of date, and then you'll want to cite reference sources, style guides, Google, things like that to show that the usage for that concept has changed. Next slide, please. So these are a couple of things that we cited in trying to make the case that Black should be changed to Black people. So we showed that the Merriam-Webster dictionary says that the plural form Blacks referring to a group of people is increasingly considered offensive, and style guides often advise writers to use Black people instead. Next slide. And then we also cited the National Association of Black Journalists style guide, which also makes the same case that you should use Black people instead of Blacks. So we were able to submit this proposal to the Library of Congress, and having shown pretty clearly that the usage has changed, and furthermore the former usage is now considered offensive. They agreed that we should that this change could be made, and this proposal went through, and the heading was changed. So next slide. We wanted to first just find out if people have questions based on what we've said so far. And I was wondering, do we keep the recording going for this part, or should we just record the presentation part? I don't know if there are any ALA rules about this.
It's up to you all if you want the questions included. You can keep recording, but it's up to you.
I mean, it's sort of up to the attendees, but I feel a little uncomfortable with recording the discussion. So, but I don't know how my co-presenters feel.
I think recording the questions would be helpful.
Okay. Thanks, Bernard. Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So Esther asks the timeline of these projects. How long does the process take? I will talk about the Blacks to Black People project because that's the one that's at the forefront of my mind right now. It really depends quite a bit. We first talked about that in probably about April of, I think it was maybe 2021 that we did that project. It was probably in about July that we really started working on it, and putting together, making the case for the change. Or maybe it was a little bit earlier than that. Part of it is because we meet monthly as a group, so we we'll have kind of like a flurry of activity, and then maybe nothing will happen or not much will happen until the next meeting. That can slow things down. But when we we put together the proposal. Oh, and then we had when you're doing a big project like this, it actually affects more than just one subject heading. So there are a lot of subject headings that included Blacks, and we also decided to change whites to white people to make that consistent across the vocabulary. So there was actually, I think, over 150 subject headings that needed to be updated because they contained those words. So it was actually a big project. And if you do a big project like that, you need to reach out to the Library of Congress and let them know that you're trying to do this project. They will assign somebody, a specialist, to work with you on it, and you'll put together a spreadsheet, and they'll look it over and make sure you're not missing anything. And so that all can take some time. And we also ended up in this, we had to figure out, they put on us the question of whether to capitalize Black and white, and that sort of slowed us down.
And we ultimately decided, I'm sorry to interrupt, Michelle, but we ultimately decided to capitalize Black, but not to capitalize white.
Right. Yeah. At that point, it had become pretty firmly established that people were capitalizing the word Black. And so we decided on that pretty quickly, but then we had to decide on white. So I know I'm sort of, this is like a sort of a special case of your question. Like, I don't think the Great Migration proposal took nearly as long because it wasn't as complicated, but just sort of giving you a window into how things can get complicated. So anyway, we ended up, it was probably in early fall of that year that we finally submitted the proposals. We had to go into the classification web proposal system and enter individually each of the changes, and then the process of going through the process of the Library of Congress, that is actually pretty slow and takes probably in a best case scenario, it takes like 3 months. So I think it was January of the next year before it actually changed. So it's like 9 months after we started discussing it, something like that. So it can be slow. It's not instantaneous gratification kind of work. But if we're just more like a simple, proposing a new heading, then it could go a lot more quickly depending on how complicated it is. Yeah, go ahead.
I did have a question. I was just curious. Why did you guys decide not to capitalize white? Because I mean, wouldn't it be indistinguishable from the actual color white whenever you use that term?
So, I mean, we were looking at things like, in journalism, do people capitalize white when they're talking about the white race?
Okay.
And we found evidence for and against. We ended up actually doing a poll of I'm sorry, Glenda and Erica, please feel free to speak up. I just keep talking. But we actually did a poll of our members, and it really just came out inconclusive. We couldn't really agree. So we decided to stick with the status quo, which was not capitalizing it, because previously both black and white had been not capitalized in LCSH. So that was what we ended up doing.
Yeah, and I know that some members had some hesitations of making the change to capitalizing white because the former individuals who had capitalized white did so for white supremacist purposes. And so there was a kind of consideration there that we didn't feel comfortable at the time saying that we've maybe either moved along. Yeah, so I think the inclusivity is the ultimate answer, but we found once we started discussing it that it was actually quite a complicated issue, even though it seems analogous, right?
Great, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna read this, but this is probably gonna be an Erica question. All right, when I teach, especially with regard to primary source research, I have a conversation with students about using antiquated terminology to search, since many primary sources are not indexed to reference current appropriate terms. How does the work affect primary source database integration?
Well, actually, I think you probably do have some to say about this, given that you're a special collections cataloger. But definitely in the area of instruction, I've used some of these changes as a kind of means through which to start to explore how to generate search terms and keywords and do as it seems like you do, often bring up the need to search some of the antiquated vocabulary that we're trying to change. And one of the things that I talk about when I do that is that we certainly don't want to whitewash the past. And so we're not in favor of kind of complete erasure of some of these vocabularies. And that's actually come up in some of our discussions, for example, around the term miscegenation. There was some debate as to whether we should wholly get rid of that term or if it was still applicable in our current context, if people were still actively using that term. And so the larger instructional question, I think that you've hit on a really complicated issue that for me brings up really interesting questions about the nature of research and kind of lends itself to critical information literacy instruction. But in terms of your last question, how does this work affect primary source database integration? I can say that vendors are looking at this. I know Adam Matthew in particular, a large primary source database vendor, has questioned or asked librarians about how they should be using Library of Congress subject vocabularies. They have said that the process is so slow that they have to make changes more quickly to their metadata. And so while they're informed by changes that we might make, I think the larger vendor, special collections, library catalogs question is a really excellent one. And I think that we're just grappling with it. So I don't think that I really answered your question, but just that it's a good one. And if you want to come to a funnel meeting, perhaps we can discuss it further. Michelle or Glenda, do you want to jump in?
I would just say that that question is a good reason why archivists, African-American archivists should be involved in the funnel, because then we could be aware of some of these terms and work on them.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that our interesting, oh, sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
No, go ahead.
I would say there are interesting projects like the On These Grounds, is that what it's called?
Mhm.
Project to really think about kind of archival description and the ways in which I think that particular project deals with enslaved histories and kind of alternate ways to um, um, think about and index enslaved people's records. Um, um, but that's just one interesting example of someone of a group that's trying to answer this question. So yeah, I think it's called On These Grounds.
Yeah, it is. We're one of the partners at UNC.
Oh, wonderful. And Michelle, do you have
Not that
thoughts? I mean, as an archivist?
Oh, yeah, I
Or
mean,
other-
I'm not, I have been asked before. I remember being asked at some presentation, like, how do we get the database people to improve their vocabularies? And I was like, oh, I have no idea. It really depends on the database that, sometimes I think they have their own controlled vocabulary and, what influence do we have on that? At least the Library of Congress vocabularies are like, you can contribute to them as a member of the profession. And I don't know much about databases because I'm a cataloger. So I work in the cataloging world. So yeah, good question though. I'm gonna go on to the next question if that's okay. Have you noticed that African American psychology is not under BF, instead it's under E 185.625? Oh boy.
Yeah, we have.
And other African American topics are in different places. Wow. Library of Congress classification is its own world, and I always feel like it's like decades behind LCSH and getting updated. These things are always coming up where you're like, wait, what? Like, how is this? You feel like you've been transported back in time, back to the 1940s or something like that. It's very strange. So thank you for pointing those out. That's really interesting to take a look. We have dipped our toe into Library of Congress classification, but mostly with the N4 cutter that Glenda mentioned earlier. We did do the original proposal to change one of the N4 cutters for Negro. And that led to the Library of Congress changing them all to cutters that start with B for Black. So now, if there's something that's, where there's different subdivisions based on groups of people, instead of African Americans and Black people being under N, now they're under B, which is an improvement. But then you look around and there's a million other things in classification. A lot of us are just not experts on that the same way. It's more complicated than updating the subject headings, I think. But that's
Believe it or not. I mean, updating subject headings is complicated, but it's even more complicated.
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Wanda, for adding the On These Grounds link.
Thank you. Yeah, and if you change a classification number, then libraries have to either have books on a particular topic split between two different places, or have to reclassify. Like at my library, they did go through and reclassify all the N4 cutters to B cutters, but that was, I'm sure, thousands of books. So it's a lot. In like at the Library of Congress, they never change their call numbers, so theirs will always stay separate, but then they have closed stacks, so it's not as much of a big deal. So yeah, it's every once in a while, Library of Congress will do a big redo of classification. Like they just redid Ukraine because basically all the former Soviet republics were treated as like former Soviet republics and not countries in their own right. So they redid Ukraine recently, but it's a lot of work changing something like that. Oh, graphic novels. Okay. Yeah, I think I heard a little bit about that, but I don't catalog graphic novels, so I didn't know I didn't really know the details of that. Any other questions before we move on?
All right, well, we can circle back for more questions if we have time at the end. If everyone's okay with this, we'll move on to our the next portion of our presentation, which is to help us prioritize terms. There are two ways that you can do this. If you come across terms in LCSH that are outdated or omitted, if you come across a book that you're cataloging and the terms you feel are insufficient and they're related to African American life, history, and culture, please let us know. There are many ways to do this. You can email me, Michelle, pardon me, or Kaylin Blunt, who is our coordinator. But we've also put together this form, which you can kind of see in the background here. If you do just want to quickly get your thoughts out there, you don't want an email exchange and you just want to submit this so that we're aware of it, you can access this form via this QR code here or this tiny URL here. So please don't hesitate to do that as you continue your work in cataloging or instruction or library work in general. Also, members of the Funnel Project have identified lists of terms, and we actually have quite a few that we'd like to work on, but we don't know what to prioritize. So we were hoping to use some of this time to get your feedback on what you would prioritize, and then we're going to have a discussion as to why. So the terms that we've highlighted are here: Afro-European, Chicago Black Renaissance, Mammy figure, racial hoaxes, African American foodways, Black ecology, Black Cherokee, and for this one, we're kind of thinking Black Cherokee or other Indigenous groups, other Afro-Indigenous groups, and redlining. So in order to capture your feedback, I know that we have a large group, 45 attendees. We were hoping that you could do a poll. And the way that we would like for you to do this is just submit 3 times. So don't put all of them in the same submission. Submit 1, submit 2, submit 3. But basically, we would like for you to record your top 3. If you could work on any of these now, or if you could have any of these approved at this moment, which would they be? So the poll everywhere is here. I'm going to, oh goodness, I'm sorry. I'm going to put this, this code in the chat now. Here. So it's pollev.com/Erica B. You can also capture it via this QR code. And I'm actually going to put these terms back here. But if any of you are having problems seeing it, I can also show you what the interface should look like. So can I get a thumbs up if people were able to get into the poll? Oh, and also one thing, you'll also see it'll ask you something strange, like, do you want to sign up? Just click skip. Oh dear, you're getting a black screen. That's not good. Of course you are, because it's live. So it is activated. Okay, so someone else is getting it. So Ronja, if you would like, maybe try the QR. Oh, great. Okay. So we're going to give you about 3 minutes to do that. And I'm also going to put the question in the chat just because I know it's a little awkward that it's not on the screen now. And just think about it for a moment and we will reconvene. It's 2:36. We'll reconvene at about 2:40. Yeah, right around 2:40. Thanks so much, everyone. Oh, I'm sorry. I just took out the terms of list. Yes, thank you, Anne. Oh, I volunteered to do the technology and I probably shouldn't have. Okay, hold on just a moment. And I will reshare. I'm coming back. Thank you for your patience. Oh, that's not it. Oh, good Lord. Okay. Can we all see that?
Looks good.
Okay, thanks. Okay. I apologize, everyone. I might have done something to the poll, so let's just give it a moment. Yep, I have that too. I'm not sure why. Okay, so try again. And if not, we can just move on to our discussion if the poll doesn't work. I hope that we can get it to work, but it says it's activated. Oh, I see things happening. So let me just put a list of the terms in the chat so as not to okay. So the list of terms is in the chat. If you're not if you're still having trouble, just feel free to private message me or message the group. So because of the technical issues, I'm just going to give everyone about another minute or two. Okay. Does anyone need more time? It looks like the word cloud is kind of stabilizing. Need one more minute. Okay, maybe just try to wrap up in 1 minute and then we'll, if you haven't already, and we will move on to our discussion. So I'm going to try to present, and I think that that may close the poll. So if you didn't have time to put all of your suggestions, feel free to do so in the chat. But I will go ahead and present and then share the screen, and we can begin to see what everyone thought. Can you all see that okay? Okay. So thanks everyone for for adding your thoughts. So it looks like many of you especially would like to see redlining. That's interesting. The mammy figure seems pretty actually they're kind of all over the place. So I like that many of them are represented, but I'm wondering if maybe we could hear from one or two people about why they chose what they did. And I'll be taking notes.
So this is Desiree, and I think the reason it's appearing weird is that if you have more than one word, it's separating each word.
Yeah.
So I think with Black, I'm pretty sure whoever wrote that maybe meant Black American. But but I'll let that person speak. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that maybe it captured a lot of like Black Cherokee or Black foodways.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So I apologize for that glitch. But really this was meant to get us just all thinking and give you all an opportunity to think about what you might prioritize. So hopefully it serves that purpose. So I don't know, Desiree, would you like to talk about what you chose and why? Would you be comfortable? Or if you're not, would someone else like to chime in?
That's what I get for coming off.
You don't have to.
So I chose redlining as number one. Just because I think of it like Great Migration, that it's a concept or term that is pretty popular and is something that is still happening today. Yeah.
I can talk a little bit about this if you're interested. If you look it up right now in LCSH, redlining does appear, but not as a subject heading. It points you to discrimination in credit cards and discrimination in mortgage loans. So I think it's one of those concepts where it kind of gets, it's not there, but it's like kind of flattened, or the specificity of it is lost. And kind of gets put into under a more general umbrella term.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty common.
And Desiree, you weren't the only one. Many other people chose that one. Would anyone else like to talk about why? Maybe for similar reasons or agree? Yes, Tricia.
Hi. So I have actually more of a question about that. If there already are kind of term subject headings that share like similar concepts, do you plan to put some sort of scope note in to make it so that people know when to use each subject heading? I chose redlining as well because I think it's obviously like a major area of study, and I was kind of shocked that there would be a gap like that in the headings. But if there are other terminology, how do you plan to kind of distinguish between them for catalogers?
Yeah, I think there's another group I'm in where people are very, very passionate about the use of scope notes. I don't know how much we've talked about it a lot in this group, but there are a lot of people who feel very strongly about the importance of scope notes, and letting people know how to use a heading. So I mean, I think if we proposed it, we would add a scope note. Writing scope notes can be very tricky because you have to kind of draw a line around something while not overly limiting it. But I think we would for something like this.
Yeah, and I don't know, Michelle, if a term like miscegenation would be a parallel where the scope note it did exist in the vocabulary, but the scope note wasn't just kind of flat. It was maybe misrepresented, and so for that particular instance, did we add a qualifier, Michelle?
We did add a qualifier to the term. I can't remember if we proposed a change to the scope note. Yeah, I'd have to look.
But yeah, this does come up a lot where terms are misrepresented in either the scope note or we've noticed that they're misapplied. And part of, I think, our mission is to try to make that or help make that not happen. Yes, Bernard.
I chose redlining as well. I think it is a very important topic, especially dealing with African Americans now. And there's a book out called The Color of Law that deals specifically with it, and other books as well too. But I mean, we as a nation and society don't really know or that familiar with what went on with redlining, and that concept is actually coming to a fore now, and we're starting to learn more about it. And it talks about how Black people were impoverished over decades of just being pushed out of neighborhoods, denied loans and things like that. So yeah, it's a very important topic, and I think it's something that needs to be addressed now, and it needs to be easily searchable within our system.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's one thing about LCSH is when they say, oh, well, you can just use this other thing. But if that's not what anyone's going to search on, if it's not vocabulary that people are going to use, and it's not clear that it means that, then that's not really helping. So I think we're always trying to get to move toward having more like natural language and like words that people actually use as Library of Congress subject terms. I'm going to let somebody else answer this question in the chat about whether it's whether redlining is still active government procedure.
I that's a good question. I don't know, I'm afraid.
I don't know either.
I think it depends on how you find
technically,
it.
Yeah,
it's
you're,
not.
you have,
Technically, it is not.
you're not
But I
supposed to
am sure that
discriminate.
there are places that try to still get away with it. I mean, I guess the way like political lines are drawn within states now can be an aspect of redlining as well too, because it disenfranchises minorities, African Americans, for the right to vote.
And for those of you who might not be monitoring the chat, Tatiana put a link to cases in Richmond around redlining. So it's a great question. And that's the exact kinds of questions that come up in the funnel. I'm actually glad that it came up, because once you start digging into a term, thinking about how to define it, does it include things that are happening now? Is it retrospective? Is it a historical term? Is it a current term? It leads to really robust discussion, and it's complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to have subject experts in the group who can speak to these kinds of questions.
Yeah. And Margaret, you have your hand raised.
Hi, this is great. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for extending the invitation. I just wanted to chime in on the preference for the term redlining. I don't like it when one term points to two other terms. This is not great in subject analysis. Everybody knows it as redlining, and they're supposed to search for two different discrimination in headings. And what if, it could apply to some a little more broadly. So, and obviously redlining is the term that everyone knows today. So I just wanted to chime in for also my reasoning for, and it just seems like, as others have pointed out, such a gap to not I was shocked to see that this was not established as such in LCSH. So thank you all very much for your good hard work.
Sure. It looks like maybe Black Cherokee also, or Afro-Cherokee. It's also something that people are interested in. I don't know if anyone wants to speak up about that, or Afro-European seems quite large. Anyone has thoughts as to why they chose those?
I chose Black Cherokee because you have a lot of intermixing or marrying between Indians or Native Americans and African Americans. And so if you're in Florida, they talk about Black Seminoles. And then you have your Black Cherokees, you have your Black Crees, you have your Black Apaches. So I think that that's something that we should work on and recognize and try to get this, not just Black Cherokee, but all of those that are indigenous and have African American descent.
Excellent. Thank you. Anyone else have thoughts, discussions, has raised any additional questions?
Yeah, and the situation with like Black people in places other than the United States can be tricky because there's Library of Congress policy about that, and about like what kinds of subject headings there can be. So people have tried to get Afro-Latin Americans added, and that has been rejected, unfortunately, based on policy.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
we
it could be frustrating. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I interrupted. Tatiana said, can you please repeat? I'll let you do that first.
Oh, about Tatiana, about the policy. Yeah. Okay, so I can't remember the exact policy. So it's in the subject headings manual. There's this document called the subject headings manual for those who aren't catalogers that governs Library of Congress subject headings, and it says something like you can't have like you can't have something like Afro-Cubans. You have to just have Black people Cuba. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the details right off the top of my head, but there are specific policies around that would need to be changed in order for us to get some of these headings added. Cheryl.
Hi, yes. First of all, strong commendations to proposing that the term be Black Cherokee as opposed to Black Cherokee Indians. But I do wonder if that conversation came up because the current LCSH term is indeed Cherokee Indians. So I was wondering about the backstory, if there is any, between the excellent choice to suggest the term Black Cherokee.
Well, that's a great question. I didn't even think about that. The Library of Congress is about to hopefully hire somebody who's going to look like holistically at Indigenous headings for Indigenous people in the United States. And so this would actually probably be a project that we wouldn't want to try to take on until they figure out some things, because they are going to look at things like if the heading, current heading is Cherokee Indian, should it just be Cherokee or Cherokee people or something like that? So that's something that they're gonna be trying to figure out in the coming years. I suspect that we just put that because that was the term that really is actually used.
Yeah, Bernard.
And also too, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, isn't the term Indian kind of going away as well? Mainly Native American is what we use to describe what used to be Indians, what we used to call Indians within our country.
Yeah. I think yes, and tribal identities. I understand that a lot of Indigenous groups really prefer one to call them Cherokee versus, but yeah, for sure. I think that's something that the Library of Congress is trying to figure out. Maybe, hopefully. Yes, Kristen.
I had a question about the Black Cherokee heading, because I'm not sure if this would be something that might be covered under the project that they'll be doing more with Indigenous headings, but thinking specifically about how the I'm trying to get the words. I have it in front of me. The freedmen movement, and how, Black folks who are descendants of enslaved folks from the 5 tribes, and how that terminology might come into play. Like, would that be something that is covered under Black Cherokee, or would that be something else entirely? Or is this a term that might cover, that movement that is still very much alive today as freedmen are trying to get those rights with Indigenous groups? So I was just curious about that.
That's a great question. And, that's why it's so wonderful to have smart, interesting people who are thinking about this, because of course, yes, that's really important. We wouldn't want to classify because that fight has been long and it has been fraught for former freedmen or descendants of slaves kind of being denied that citizenship right. It's quite that adds a level of complexity that I didn't think of. So that would be something that we would need to consider and really move forward in a way where we wouldn't inadvertently be suggesting that not respecting this fight by just saying, oh, well, they're just Black Cherokee, you know, if the fight for citizenship is ongoing. So yeah, I don't really have an answer to that question. I don't know if Michelle or Glenda or Kristen, you have other things to say about it, but just that, yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, you can see why these are all these discussions end up being really complex. And it takes us a while to work out what we want to do. Sometimes we might spend many months trying to figure something out, because it's not just a black and white, clear cut thing with most of these topics. I really appreciate everyone who's putting thoughts and stuff in resources in the chat as well.
Yeah, we'll be
Well,
sure to
and I'll-
capture this.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kimberly Gay. I am the head of reference and information services at the John B. Coleman Library. I work at an HBCU, Prairie View A&M University. And one of the things I see and I notice that we've changed the narrative at our university when it comes to even February and looking at Black History Month. We don't say Black because Black is a color. We say African American because African, especially the Africana diaspora, is a culture. It's a level of diversity. It's an ethnicity. So we've stopped using the word Black to say Black History Month, and we say African American History Month because we're encompassing the actual culture of the African American instead of saying Black and relating it back just to a color. So why is the word Black? This is what scares me. Why is the word Black so emphasized?
Yeah. I don't know if Glenda or Michelle want to take this. I can start. We've had discussions about this in a related way, in that we've wanted to take care that our funnel focuses on the African American experience. And so that can include other parts of the diaspora, but I think our bounds in part, and maybe this is wrong, maybe this is something we need to reconsider, I don't know. But we really want to focus on African American life and culture and history. So it has come up in that regard. We're not kind of, you know, we've thought about parallel concepts in Africa or Europe, and we do address those. So, but yeah, just that boundary making is hard. But why have we focused on, I don't think we've intentionally focused on Black. I don't know that this kind of
In the history books that I have read or reviewed, reviews and so forth, book titles, is usually, I think it's called, we could say common vernacular, that is Black Seminole, Black Cherokee. If we wanted to change it, then we would have to change we would have to approach it as African American, Cherokee, or so forth. But I think for the history of it, it's always been Black and then the indigenous nation.
Yeah. But you know, even with like Afro-European, we've thought of like Afropean, Afro-European, African European, there's different constellations, and that's what makes this work so hard, right? Like what is the terminology that will get people to find these materials that are classified as such, but also that won't reify patterns that we don't want that we don't want to perpetuate. So like it can be really hard. So I really appreciate the question. And it's really interesting that that y'all are moving away from Black terminology. So yeah, thank you.
And when we say
right,
that creates a culture. And what happens, guys, when y'all know, when we look at it from a culture, that means that we add music and food and literature and language and dance. So it just literally creates this ferocious appetite in understanding the culture instead of looking and saying it's Black.
Right. Yeah, point taken. I'm taking notes, so I'll definitely take that back to the group. Thank you. So we are at 3:03. Did we want to take maybe one final question, or should we wrap up, Michelle and Glenda?
Well, unless they cut us off, we could take one more question, but I also wanted to encourage everyone that if there's a term that we have, that you have in mind, to please share it with us, because we'd be happy to work on it.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
were we planning to give people a way of like reaching out if they want to join the group
absolutely.
or attend? I couldn't remember.
Absolutely. We have a slide on it, and
Oh, thank
I
you.
am working on getting there now, just to remind everyone how they can contact us. And I'm just going to leave it in this form because I fear that I'm going to. Yes, if you all want to join our work, again, you can make suggestions via the form that I mentioned before. You can become an active member. You can ask that we send you updates if you are part of a professional organization that you'd like to kind of distribute information about our work. There are many ways that you can get involved. And just a reminder that individuals with any level of subject or cataloging knowledge, we really encourage to participate if you have a genuine interest in this work. That's kind of at the core. If you have a genuine interest in African American history and culture, and improving the subject vocabularies. So yes, again, here's the suggestions form, and here's our contact information. Glenda's email is listed here, Michelle's is here, and I'm here. And again, if you just want to meet with us one-on-one, if you want to come to a meeting and kind of figure out how the process works, we do invite you to do that. And we'd especially, I don't know if there are any students on the call, we'd especially like some student involvement. So if you're a student and equivocating, join us. Yes, Glenda, do you want to wrap it up and send people on their way?
Yes, I want to thank everyone for coming. I hope some of you are African American Studies Interest Group members. If not, I encourage you to join our interest groups, because we are interested in having research and presentations on the subject, and to further our knowledge and study of the African American experience in the United States. So as Erica said, we encourage you to participate in the funnel, but I also like to encourage you to participate in our interest group. Thank you for coming.
Hey, thank
you
you so
all
much.
for the robust discussion.
Yes, thank you so much for your feedback. Take care.